And from the White House to Taipei, the stakes of the American power projection have never felt more surreal or more precarious. On one front, President Trump has embraced a messianic persona, portraying himself as a divinely spared to lead America into a new era. On another, his unpredictability on China risks triggering the very war he claims to prevent. And is Trump's faith-driven mythology reshaping U.S. foreign policy or just masking a deeper strategic void? And I'm Salma El-Fiki, and this is In Focus.
Donald Trump is his name, and he's there to stay.
As unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
America powerful. We will win, win, win. And we will make America great again. We will very quickly make America great again.
Politico's Friday read asks a chilling question. Does Trump actually think he's God? Since surviving an assassination attempt last summer in Butler, Pennsylvania, President Trump has leaned into overtly divine language, framing his survival and re-election as an act of God. He now calls presidency a divine mission, invoking biblical language and sharing AI-generated images of himself as Pope. Formerly a fatalist, Trump's shift towards messianic messaging has escalated, with symbolic changes in the White House and a growing circle of religious advisors encouraging the narrative. Scholars warn that this new framing blurs political authority with spiritual infallibility, raising profound concerns for democratic institutions. And to help us unpack this rhetoric and what reveals about Trump's second-term agenda, we're joined by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, Mr. David K. Johnston. Professor Johnston, welcome back to In Focus. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start off, sir. Let's begin with the Politico piece. How do you interpret Trump's shift from fatalism to divine self-mythologizing, do you think?
Well, I've been saying since at least 2011 that Donald believes that he alone is competent to be president of the United States, and he believes he should run the whole world. I was mocked for that back in 2011, and yet Donald Trump recently told the Atlantic magazine, "I run the country and the whole world." Donald absolutely believes that he is godlike, and his administration has encouraged all of these, I would argue if you're a religious person, blasphemous actions that suggest exactly that he is either divinely protected or a divinity himself. And it's not going to serve him well in the long run, but it certainly strengthens his tie to his base, which is about 1 in 5 Americans.
Well, Professor, do you think this is all about personal belief or just political strategy or a mix of both?
Well, to some extent, it's a mix of both, but at its core is these delusional views Donald has. You know, he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects. There's no one greatest expert on any of them, and on all of them, he has demonstrated his appalling ignorance. Donald lives in a world that he makes up in his head. He creates his own reality. And when he needs to, on a dime, he can just rewrite his narrative to deny what he said or propose something completely new and out of the blue, because there's no strategy or depth or philosophy or ideology. It's just Donald and his emotional needs.
Well, I mean, the White House replaced Obama's portrait with art. commemorating the assassination attempt. Is Trump trying to rewrite his legacy in real time? I mean, or is this just a propaganda or cult building, do you think, Professor?
Well, Donald Trump is a white supremacist. He has been throughout his whole life. He's been the subject of judicial proceedings where he was fined for discriminating against women, blacks, Asians, and Puerto Ricans. And removing Obama's photo is part of this overall wipe out the history of everyone in America who isn't white and male and Christian or nominally Christian.
And how do you think, sir, religious leaders, especially evangelicals, fit into this myth-making process?
Well, actual Christians are appalled and have been speaking up about this. People who have no idea what's in their Bible, Old Testament or New, they embrace this. And in fact, we've had credible news reports of a number of pastors in America saying that their followers have said, we don't want to hear this Jesus stuff about turn the other cheek and love the stranger. We want Donald's philosophy. Hit them, beat them, kill them. That's what we want you to preach. That's a very disturbing development, but it's a small minority of people also.
But sir, do you think President Trump invoking the divine purpose, and is that allowing him to justify more radical executive action maybe?
Oh, yes. Donald will use this to argue that he's already arguing the court should not interfere. They should remove from the bench judges who do not support what he wants to do, even when it's a gross violation of the American Constitution. And some of his aides, particularly his Minister of Hate, Stephen Miller, have been working very hard to delegitimize the courts on Trump's behalf.
How does this narrative, do you think, in your opinion, Professor, help shield him from legal or maybe ethical accountability? Do you think that could be maybe a way to do that?
No. What's shielding him from legal accountability is that he appointed a very corrupt person to be the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, who has already displayed her willingness to go after people who oppose Trump and to treat lightly or let walk away criminals who do what Donald likes in the world. Trump has pardoned a whole bunch of vicious criminals, major drug lords, murderers in the past few months. And on an ethical level, he has not filled out his required government ethics form with disclosing his finances. Most of his top staff have not done this. So he is simply thumbing his nose at the strictures under which a president and appointees of the president are supposed to operate. But who's going to enforce it? His attorney general. She's not going to do anything unless he wants it done because she acts as his personal lawyer, not the lawyer of the American people.
Well, Trump's post-assassination rhetoric is steeped into being a divine language. How dangerous do you think this is to frame political power as a mission from God?
I think we don't know for sure how this will play out. He's being praised by a number of the television pastors. I watched a video today of a pastor who believes, that if you're a woman and you don't do whatever your husband says, you should be beaten up by your husband, who supports Trump. And those are the kinds of people who are going to build on this idea. But I don't think that represents the large majority of Americans. I also don't think we're going to see any significant reaction from Americans until his economic actions begin to hit them. The loss of jobs, the lack of health care. He's taking away health care from many, many poor people in America. Until those hit people, I don't think you're going to see a reaction because large numbers of Americans pay no attention whatsoever to the news. And there's a significant group where anything that Donald says is untrue, that means it's untrue. They only believe in him. That's the cultish aspect of this.
Well, sir, do you think, Professor, that the Americans are going to accept this kind of narrative? I mean, is this it's something new in the American history? Or do you have what you have to say about that? I mean, how accepting are the Americans going to be to this kind of narrative?
Well, human beings are fundamentally herd animals, and so far no one has risen up as a leader to counter Donald Trump. The Democrats seem to be wandering around in the wild trying to figure out what to do. They write letters, but they haven't taken any real actions. And until someone emerges who can stand up to Trump or multiple people with a following, he will continue to get away with this.
Well, some evangelicals compare him to a biblical Cyrus. What does that say about the American political theology today?
Well, large numbers of people in America who call themselves Christians believe in things that have absolutely nothing to do with Christianity. And there are many videos in the U.S. of people being asked about their beliefs, and they don't have a clue what's in their Bible that they insist is the absolute truth. And the underlying problem there is that half of Americans read at the level of an 11-year-old child or below. That's a core problem here. And so Trump is going after everyone who's educated. He's going after places like Harvard University, the most prestigious school in America, in order to try and build permanent support so he can stay in the White House until he dies.
And how should the media, do you think, and the public respond to this blend of religion and authoritarianism, do you think, sir?
Yeah, I think my peers in journalism have not done a good job. One of the mistakes, the most important ones they make, is they quote Trump and then they take apart what he says. What they should do is say, we're going to quote Trump when he said something that's crazy, illegal, makes no sense, whatever. Then you take it apart. That's called a truth sandwich. You warn people, you tell them the falsehood, then you take it apart. Because the only part of the message that survives if you just quote him and then take it apart is what he said. And there's lots of research showing that's how people think. A lot of coverage has been very good. A great deal of it, even in the very best publications, like where I used to work at the New York Times, has been very sort of namby-pamby, soft on the edges, not really getting to the core and using obfuscating language instead of being direct.
And finally, do you think, are we entering a new era of American politics where maybe charisma and divinity override constitutional limits?
Well, we're certainly entering an era here where celebrity, claims of divinity are rising. They've been coming for some time, since Ronald Reagan, a B-level movie actor, became president of the United States in 1981. Whether they will get away with overriding the Constitution will depend in large part on two things: the U.S. Supreme Court and whether it upholds the Constitution, which it's been doing by and large, and voters, and whether they turn out in the fall of next year, almost 18 months away, and change the Congress and give control to the Democrats.
Well, Professor David K. Johnston, thank you so much for that sharp analysis of the dangers behind the divine rhetoric, and do stay with us, please. But while Trump paints himself as a heaven sent, his approach to China and Taiwan may invite something far more earthly: conflict. In his latest column, The Guardian's Simon Tisdale argues that Trump's erratic and transactional policies on China and Taiwan may make war more likely and not less. Trump's massive tariffs on Chinese and Taiwanese imports, critics of Taiwan's semiconductor dominance, and attacks on student visas have inflamed tensions. Meanwhile, China is ramping up military pressure near Taiwan, rehearsing blockades and cyber warfare scenarios. Experts warn that Trump's strategic ambiguity has become strategic incoherence. His aggressive rhetoric is seen by Beijing as provocations without resolve. Coupled with his unwillingness to confront other global threats, this may embolden Xi Jinping to act before 2027, when he's reportedly set a deadline for full invasion readiness. And we are joined again by Professor David K. Johnston, who's still with us to explore the chaos and consequences of Trump's China stance. And Professor, thank you so much for staying with us. And let's start with the tariffs now. Trump raised tariffs on Chinese and Taiwanese goods while calling both territories economic threats. What's the strategic logic, if any, do you think?
There isn't. Donald believes in an economic system called mercantilism that went out of style in the 1700s. If you have a dollar or a piece of gold, the only way I can get wealthier is to take it from you. That's what went on between the British and the Spanish over gold in the New World for several centuries. And Donald does not understand market economics. He says constantly all these countries are stealing from us because during his lifetime, what did he do? He ran enterprises that stole from the workers, the vendors, the investors, and banks. So it's not surprising he turns this around and thinks everybody's stealing from him. He also does not have the power to implement these tariffs. The U.S. Constitution gives that power to Congress with some very limited temporary exemptions. And I think you will see the U.S. Supreme Court before long uphold that he does not have the power to flip-flop or impose any kind of tariffs on other countries. The Chinese, meanwhile, who are deeply educated and very skilled people at the top of the Chinese government, they're sitting back and let Trump make a fool of himself.
Well, is Trump genuinely concerned, sir, about Taiwan's semiconductor dominance, do you think, or is this just part maybe of a broader trade bluff?
Yeah, it's part of a broader trade bluff. I mean, Donald doesn't know anything. If you could sit Donald down, as I've done many times in the distant past, and say to him, well, tell us the history of Taiwan. How did it go from Formosa to Taiwan, and what's the dispute? He doesn't have a clue. Well, Xi Jinping wants it back. That's the amount of depth he would have. Now, the people in Taiwan have been very worried ever since Richard Nixon, recognized China, and then Jimmy Carter opened up formal relations with them. So as far back as 1977, I was writing about wealthy Taiwan residents who were moving their fortunes to the U.S. and showing how they were laundering the money. And this has been a concern. China has a very expansionist view of its place in the world. It wants to go back to 1500 when it was the wealthiest country in the world, along with India. But they also think in long-term views. They're harassing Taiwan right now. I will be surprised if they take military action in the near future. But in the long run, they intend to get Taiwan back without any question. Whether it takes them 6 months or 60 years is really not that big a concern to the Chinese leadership, who are patient. They, like the Catholic Church, their view of the world is, we're here forever.
Well, sir, if you can take us maybe to the Chinese point of view, how do you think Beijing is likely interpreting this erratic mix of hostility and retreat, do you think?
Well, Chinese state media, and all the media in China, even the privately held, is Chinese state media, is mocking Trump. They're airing various kinds of videos that make fun of him. They're portraying him as a fool. And that shouldn't be surprising, because Trump's behavior has been erratic because he doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, his appalling ignorance and lack of knowledge is at the core of this. And Donald thinks that Xi Jinping is going to come to him seeking some kind of relief. I mean, Donald said not long ago that there are leaders all over the world coming to me and they're saying, oh, thank you, Mr. President, for what you did with these tariffs. We're so appreciative. Utter and complete fantasy on Donald's part, but part of his need to have an image that everyone in the world bows down to the great Donald.
Well, does Trump's unpredictability offer maybe Xi Jinping the perfect cover to escalate pressure on Taiwan?
It could be used in that fashion, but I don't think that the Chinese are going to have anything Donald does motivate their behavior. And the U.S. is obligated by treaty to defend Taiwan. So unless Donald renounces that treaty, which he doesn't have the legal authority to do, but he does have the practical authority to not follow the law, I don't think the Chinese are going to risk the larger problems, since they know in the long run they're going to get what they want. And there are other means by which they can achieve this, including harassing a business, sending lots of warships around around Taiwan, and making difficulty for Taiwan with a lot of trade that goes back and forth. There are manufactured goods like iPhones that go from Taiwan to China to back to Taiwan to China, and then come to the US and Europe and Egypt.
And how does Trump's transactional isolationist style weaken America's deterrence posture in East Asia?
This is the real large-scale fundamental problem here. Trump's turning his back in terms of not just trade, but also military and humanitarian aid really weakens the United States. And the nightmare scenario for the Trump administration would be if the European Union, the UK, Canada, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, India get together and form a free trade zone. If they did that, I suspect they would give special privileges to China, but not admission to such a free trade zone, just special privileges. And if that were to happen, U.S. influence in world trade, the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency, I think would shrivel very quickly. What Trump is doing right now in terms of denying foreign students visas, pushing people to leave the country if they're foreign born, even if they are bringing a great deal of foreign money to the U.S., those things are weakening the United States. They will make the United States poorer in the future. But that's as a country as a whole. At the same time, Trump is doing a whole group of public policy positions that will take the already super wealthy and make them super wealthier.
I mean, do his trade wars, do you think, risk provoking Beijing into military escalation, Professor? I think you mentioned yes.
No,
or no.
No, the leaders in China, and I've been to China to lecture many times, they are deeply educated, they're patient, they are dictators. The Politburo is 9 thugs, and the chief dictator is Xi Jinping. But they're going to operate on their schedule, what they want to do, and they're going to do so very strategically. They're going to have thought through all the things that can go wrong, as opposed to Donald, who just shoots from the hip, and whatever pops into his head at the moment, that's what he says.
What are the allies in Asia and NATO saying about the U.S. reliability maybe under Trump, sir?
Well, the Japanese press is reporting that the government there is quite concerned about Trump's erratic behavior. Similarly, in South Korea, now all of these governments are speaking through proxies, unnamed sources, because they don't want to antagonize Trump. But if you follow, as I do, any news organizations in East Asia, you can't miss that governments are saying, how do we deal with this crazy person in Washington? And so the tone of coverage is very clear in terms of what's being put out on background by government officials. There's also concern about Trump not respecting secrets, particularly what's called sources and methods. Who told us this and how did we get that information? And so they're being very cautious. There's also some discussion of not buying American arms, particularly advanced American fighter jets, and instead buying from the Europeans.
And Professor, do you believe Trump's improvisational foreign policy is actually collapsing America's traditional strategy towards China?
Oh, absolutely. All around the world, Trump's approach here is damaging the United States. The United States, imperfect by a mile for sure, has always stood for freedom and liberty against dictators until Trump, who is admiring Putin and blaming Ukraine for a war that the Russians started. He says he admires dictator Kim, one of the most ruthless dictators in the world, MBS in Saudi Arabia, who, let's remember, 12 years ago had a dozen or so men beheaded for the crime of praying for a better government. And that's who Trump is. Trump imagines himself as a strong man, even though he doesn't have the inner strength to be one. And he wants to be like Putin, like Xi, able to do whatever he wants and to take his critics and silence them, if necessary, by throwing him into a gulag somewhere.
Well, Professor David K. Johnston, thank you so much again for helping us make a sense of a world where divine destiny and dangerous diplomacy collide. Thank you very much, sir. So, from divine savior to destabilizing strategist, Donald Trump's second term is rewriting the rules of political leadership. In religion, in rhetoric, and in war games with China, the costs may be greater than imagined. We'll be watching. Until next time, stay with us as we bring the world in focus.